the results were phenomenal. Um, we just found dying vegetation rebounded. Uh, Lots of new vegetation started to self-volunteer, and that which we planted was doing far better than what was going on with our neighbors. And when I mention neighbors, I'll segue into one of the first things we did is we organized an annual neighborhood tree planting. And this was um, for a number of reasons. We were reacting to the fact that our urban neighborhood had very barren, solar oven-like public rights of ways. So there was not much community interaction because it was so uncomfortable to be outside. So we went door to door knocking and introduced ourselves and then set up these potlucks and whatnot, and where we all asked each other, what do we want as a community? And everyone wanted more life, more community, more interaction. So, and people weren't really into going to the neighborhood meetings. So we thought, all right, let's do something different. Let's organize annual tree planting, and let's bring life back into the public realm. But at the time, the city's tree planting program only offered exotic, ornamental, invasive species. They weren't offering any multi-use species, that produced food. They weren't offering any native plants that were the best suited for our climate, soils, and wildlife. So we made our own plant list, and with their blessing, we're able to use that, and they agreed to acquire those trees for us at a subsidized cost. The other thing that we really wanted to push was, which was a radical 180-degree shift, was plant the rain before we plant any tree. So every tree had to go into a water harvesting basin, which is, at the time, that was the opposite of what would happen. People would typically plant on mounds. I think that was done in part so they wouldn't have to dig so much to a hard soil. They just bring in loose soil, put the mound there. The landscape industry liked that because they could sell more product. But it didn't perform well. But our planting in the basins did great, and we found we had at least a 50% greater success rate with those trees planted in basins compared to those just planted at grade. Because if people forgot to water or just ignored the new planting, it had a much better survival rate. The other thing, when we selected these, we made our own plant list. We looked to the local ethnobotanical record, and we looked at what species were used for the most uses. So we combined the best adaptation of these native species with greatest use. So food production, medicine, fiber, other craft materials, and so on. Even though we didn't know how to use all of them, okay, we just knew they could be used. And that first year, we planted over 200 trees just with neighborhood volunteers. And since then, going every year, we've now planted over 1,500 trees as a neighborhood since 1996, which is fantastic. It's dramatically transformed the neighborhood. It's much cooler now. It's much more walkable, bikeable. Many species of native birds